Hey everybody, Ryan here at Plague Scythe Studios. Welcome back to Heavy Reflection. Today's publicly broadcast gear-related therapy session is on knockoff and clone guitar gear. The good, the bad, the straight up scummy, and all of the complications that arise from this little sub-market we have in the guitar gear industry, though it's certainly prevalent in just about everything. This is a topic that kind of came to mind over the course of making the past few videos where I've used some equipment, one guitar in particular, especially that could be classified as a straight up knockoff in the derogatory sense. I think we throw that word and similar phrases around a lot in especially guitar gear when we really mean something else. And I'll give you one example of the kind of stuff I'm not going to be discussing. This is a Zakk Wylde, a cobwebby at that, Zakk Wylde signature Berserker Overdrive. This is made by MXR and is actually a sequel of sorts to the original ZW44 that came before it. Even if you've not watched the extensive episode I made on this series of pedals several years ago, you could probably tell just from the control scheme alone that, yep, it's another gain, volume, tone, tube screamer type thing. But it's actually more interesting than that because this and the ZW44 are more directly based on the Boss SD1, which is what Zakk Wylde used to use before these pedals. And the SD1 is kind of a sequel of sorts to the original Boss OD1, which was the first soft clipper to come to market, and an asymmetrical one at that. And it was the tube screamer that came after the OD1 and added a tone control. So there's this big, kind of circular web of history between all of the offshoots of those pedal series. And those are not the kind of things I'm talking about today. Those are more of an evolution of technology, different design concepts being borrowed over here, but then transformed into its own things. And while we could go on for hours about the various inspired by type of pedals that leverage those original circuits and do their own kind of spin on them to make them improved or add some sort of feature, and especially about the extremely affordable small form factor ones that are made overseas and sold with mass-produced quantities to make a sliver of a profit on Amazon, those aren't really the ones that I'm talking about today. I'm interested in the ones that go a step further and not only emulate the sounds or emulate the visuals, but kind of replicate them to various degrees of quality. And I think it can be done right, it can be done well, and it can be done absolutely horribly. Even further back than that aforementioned pedalhead video, I took a stand against some irritated internet commenters' viewpoint that copying or emulating a sound coming from one piece of gear by using a different piece of gear dialed in by hand, by ear, was stealing, downright thievery. And that's something that I want to kind of revisit really quickly before we go any further and put that to bed, because emulating a sound, with, say, using this pedal to try to sound more like a tube screamer, or a Kemper profiler to sound like a real amplifier head, or indeed what I did in the previous video that was the inspiration for that one, was to create or recreate a sound on a VST plugin with a outboard amp modeler. So when I'm talking about clones here, I very much stand by my original statement that you can't own tone. It's a ridiculous concept that just because something makes this sound that someone else couldn't recreate it and even sell it. I don't think there's anything wrong, especially with taking a circuit or one mode of a circuit and making something completely different that can sound like that but does its own thing as well. The whole notion is ridiculous on its own, but trying to imagine a world where there was some sort of copyright protection against a sound, and I don't mean a piece of music or work, I mean like a guitar tone that we would dial in on this channel, is just asinine to me. I mean, if you couldn't sound like something else, then there would be, one amplifier model per company, and no one would be allowed to make any Stratocaster type guitars or Les Paul type guitars. It would be a nightmare. So that's something that I'm not worried about, and it's not even part of the conversation to me. Where this conversation really begins is when a company or even an individual takes an existing product and replicates the entire functionality of it, every sound possible, every turn of the knob, every feature, whether it be scale length, paint, pickup configuration, what have you, and the appearance on top of it. And I think no other market really exemplifies this as well, or gets into the weeds of controversy as much as the clone market. Clone with a K in this case. I think most of you can look at this and realize this is not a real Klon Centaur. But if you briefly showed your grandma a Google image search of what a Klon Centaur looks like, she would probably think this is a real Klon Centaur. Now, you and I know because of the logos and the additional branding and this mod switch and several other things that give this away as being, well, too new, first of all, but a little off compared to the original. You know this isn't a real Klon, it's a clone. And I don't think many people have an issue with this thing's existence. Why is that compared to some other clone or knockoff gear? Well, in the Klon's case, the original product is so outrageous, so hard to acquire, that everybody that wants one could not possibly obtain one through the original means. So it's no wonder a secondary market popped up for servicing those people that want to get that kind of sound, want to have something that kind of looks like it, but isn't going to pay, you know, what was $400, $500 brand new in the 90s and now has inflated to, well, $7,000 to $10,000 for those original specimens. Those original runs of Klon Centaurs were hard enough to get your hands on as is while they were being made, but shortly after there was a long stretch of time where those were discontinued and the KTR had not began production yet. So the original circuit designers were not providing their own product. So what happened? Well, the boutique scene and individual builders came in to fill the gap and supply that demand. I don't think it's unfair that someone quits selling a product that everyone likes, everyone wants, and it's already a little unattainable, to have outsiders come in and step in to fill the void. I think it's especially fair as well to make it look the same to an extent because it is very much paying homage. This is a tribute as much as it is a real product. I think it's more honest to do this than to repackage it into, let's say, like a blue random pedal case and not have any acknowledgement about the circuit that's underneath. Because we all know what we're buying, right? If you have any investment, any amount of understanding about what the Klon is, we know when we're buying this, we're buying the idea of a Klon as well as the functional sound of one. Furthermore, the existence of the Centavo, the Wampler Tumnus, or indeed the myriad of so-called clones out there does not prevent you from buying the original thing. This isn't a zero-sum game here where a purchase of this product is a lost sale from Bill Finnegan or any of the original Klon owners. Because if you're in the market for this, you're probably not in the market for an original Klon as well. You want the sound and you wouldn't mind having the aesthetic of one, but you were never going to buy one of those to begin with. It kind of goes back to that whole piracy argument where a lot of executives and companies will say, well, this movie was pirated 1 million times. We lost 1 million ticket sales. No, you didn't, because a vast majority of those users would never have paid for it to begin with. They just got something for free out of it. Do I encourage it? Do I think it's necessarily right in all cases? No. But this is one of those similar cases where just because someone buys this doesn't mean they didn't buy the other thing. They can still buy both, or they wouldn't have bought the other one to begin with anyway. One really comparable situation to this is the kit car scene for certain discontinued models. It's not like you can exactly hop down to your local Ford dealership and purchase a 1960s Shelby Cobra Roadster. And if you have one and you're not a museum, you're probably holding on to it for a 6 or 7 digit investment. So if you're a muscle car enthusiast with money to burn and you want that experience, what do? Well, basically your only real option is to purchase a kit car or assemble one of the kits yourself. And not only is it a far better expenditure of money, I mean, you're burning money anytime you buy a car anyway, but you actually get something that is usable and you probably won't feel like a complete asshole for, driving around a piece of history that's a maniac that's trying to kill you. But this is one of those instances where the original logos are not there. Now, of course, there's nothing stopping a user from getting something made to emulate that. But when you're buying a kit car, you know what you're buying. Of course, the overall visual styling and even the parts are emulating the original. However, it would be more dishonest not to do that, in my opinion. It'd be really weird to put in that powertrain into something like a Mazda and then still call it what it is. And this is another one of those instances where the purchase of that kit car is not costing Ford any money. Just because they purchased this doesn't mean they were ever going to purchase something from a new lineup of cars anyway. It's a discontinued model. They no longer provide that original service. I think it's totally fair for a third party to step up and do it that way. Things start to get a little more iffy when some intellectual property rights get blatantly crossed, though. And that is precisely what happened on this, let me read the eBay listing, I'll never get this right. High quality, black stealth electric guitar, reverse headstock, diamond inlay. I mean, that's about as picturesque of a description as you can get, right? And that's what this is. But for anyone that knows about Chuck Schuldenier's gear, I could probably lie to you right now and tell you this is a real BC Rich stealth, and it's not. And the main factor that bothers me about that is this, because the company making these knows they're in the wrong and they're doing it anyway. So interestingly enough, I don't know how this works for all these Wish, Alibaba, eBay knockoff guitars, but when this was delivered and I started sorting through the admittedly pretty impressive packaging for what it is, and especially for what it costs, I was met with a silver sticker on this region of the headstock that had a logo that, you know, was not recognizable, and I'm sure it was just representative of the factory this came from. And I did immediately recognize, though, that it was a sticker and it could be peeled off. And once you did, you're greeted with a BC Rich logo. And this isn't a BC Rich guitar. Now, what's interesting is that there's not a single picture of the front of the headstock, nor on any of their listings and on many stores like them. So it actually never crossed my mind. I honestly thought when I purchased this, I was going to get this shape, a solid black paint color, and I would get maybe some, you know, random, again, unrecognizable logo up here, or nothing at all. And much to my surprise, I was met with the BC Rich logo. Now, I know what this is, and I personally don't really have a problem with it being a functional prop or art piece. I've actually had an idea for years about doing like a Hard Rock Cafe style decor in the, you know, dining room or kitchen area with a bunch of famous guitars, ones that are really influential to me. That's for max financial instability, though. And for me, if, you know, it didn't have the logo at all, I could add one if I wanted it to. And I think at that point, it's a little different if the end user does. But selling this, knowing that you're not supposed to put another company's logo on it, and the entire guitar is based off of it as well, starts to get into pretty sketchy territory, because I'm sure they know this is copyright infringement. The whole thing probably is to a certain degree, but morally, this is another one of those cases where if it were just the shape of the guitar, if the other specs were exactly the same, I don't think there's necessarily much wrong with selling something that looks like this, because BC Rich is not. You cannot buy this configuration, this shape as is, from BC Rich new, and the signatures that are out there for Chuck Schuldenier's guitar are multiple thousands of dollars, and it's another one of those collector item things where, just like the Klon or just like a Shelby, you're not going to buy one and use it day to day as a truly utilitarian product. It has more collector value now than anything. And so filling in that gap would be no different to me than, you know, the clone market, and I think that's totally cool. But if they know they have to slap a sticker over this to get it through the American ports, that's where things start to get a little scummy. With a Centavo example, I knew I was buying a Centavo, not a Centaur. With this, based off of the original eBay listing, I knew I was not buying an original Stealth. I was buying a clone of it. But I could be a scumbag now, or somebody that gets this guitar off of me could be a scumbag and list it as the real deal. Now, anybody that has an eye for originality and is really particular about details could probably spot that this pickup has some differences, and it certainly sounds and feels different based off of the construction, and the electronics don't really match what was used at the time, and in general it looks a little too new anyway. It's just nothing would add up. And so yeah, you could probably spot it if you were really looking at it closely and had a keen eye for certain things. But years from now, there's nothing stopping me from listing this as a real stealth and trying to get some money out of it that I otherwise did not pay, and it's not worth for, because this was $350 plus shipping, which is insane that they can make a guitar this good overseas, turn a profit on it, ship it, and still you spend less than the cost of like a lunchbox amp head. But if I wanted to be a real menace to society, I could wait a few years and try to flip this for closer to $1,000 and swear up and down it's the real deal, make some, not so hard modifications to try to counterfeit the original even further, and voila, someone who is not nearly as educated on the subject isn't going to be able to tell the difference. There is no such risk with a product like this. Even if you take off the silk screen and put the original logos, there's too many differences, even though it looks like the same enclosure, and there's plenty of hallmarks on this pedal to, again, give homage to the original Klon. It's not something that you're going to have any major confusion with, even if someone tried to counterfeit it. With this, it starts to get into problematic territories where it's not just an homage, it's borderline theft. To clarify again, I don't find anything particularly wrong with any company making a guitar of this shape. There are certain shapes that are so very basic that it would be damn near impossible to argue at this point, like Gibson has attempted to, that there is a intellectual ownership of any one of them. Yes, there are certain guitars that came first, but they didn't actively litigate. They didn't protect that intellectual property, and so the precedent has been set that stuff like a Telecaster and a Stratocaster is so basic, no one company can say they own it. This one being a little more exotic, you could probably argue that this is more of a BC-rich shape, but look at Ibanez, look at Jackson. There are plenty of other competing designs like this, so I don't think there's anything wrong with any company making a shape like this, especially when they communicate that, hey, this is a stealth-like. We know what you want. They don't sell it anymore. Here you go. That's fine. Labeling it as coming from a different factory, a different brand, that's where things get problematic. There's certainly no absolute truths in this whole knockoff market situation, but if I see an organization stealing another company's logo, my first reaction is to question everything else about it. If you're willing to do this kind of shady shit, what else are you doing behind the scenes that we don't see? What's your ethics like? How are you treating and paying your employees if they are employees and not worse? How are you doing on your quality control? This guitar, like I said earlier, is kind of insane for the $400-ish shipped that was paid for it. I'm really impressed that this can be done at this cost point, but what did it cost to make this cost that? And I think there is something to be said for what can be done at this price point overseas that could potentially give a kick in the ass to some of the questionable prices of more traditional brands. But at the end of the day, you kind of lose steam in your argument if you're doing this. So it's a really complex situation that has resulted in me owning a guitar that I'm not terribly proud of. I think it's kind of cool, and I certainly don't hate the craftsmanship that made this happen. I'm sure it was, semi-mass produced in a way, but I don't love it. I really don't feel comfortable having this, next to something that is an actual well-known brand. And it doesn't have anything to do with, oh, this wasn't made in this factory, or I got to erase the Squire logo and put a Fender logo on it because that's the real one. No, it was bought through the proper channels. The people that are making it are getting paid for it. And, in the same way that if I found out there was something really scummy going on over at the Schecter headquarters or the factory that the Blood Eagle was made in, I wouldn't feel too great about that either. So it's really not just a knockoff specific issue, but at least that brand is not actively ripping off another brand's logo. So they got that going for them. In conclusion, there's not a whole lot to conclude here. Many of you probably already knew about this market segment, as well as the other types of eBay, not even really knockoffs or clones. Some of them could be, construed as a Strandberg clone, but there are plenty of more budget-friendly, varying degrees of quality instruments available out there, as well as amplifier replicas and pedals and that sort of thing. And a lot of the times you're going to get what you pay for. Sometimes it's better than what you pay for. And again, I think there is something to be said there about, well, what's everybody else's excuse? If they can do it, what are they doing better than anyone else? And maybe as an American or European consumer, you may not want to know. If we're speaking honestly here. But at the end of the day, I do feel there is a marked difference between something like this and something like that and something like that. Everything has to start from somewhere, and I don't think it's a morally wrong business practice to own up to what you're selling. Otherwise, we'd have one brand of everything, right? There would be no other commodities. There'd be one brand of coffee, one brand of toothpaste, one sedan for every car. There would be one type of beer. It would be terrible. And that's a boring world I don't really want to live in. But there is a line where at some point, if you're just selling a knockoff of that thing made to look like that thing, and you've put active effort in trying to disguise it, then there's something wrong there. So don't feel bad about owning your clone like I do. I would just not encourage you to buy stuff like this, just because we don't really know what we're supporting. And this was as much of a gamble for me as anything. I don't know how I feel about keeping this. I've got to marinate on that a little longer, but it was pretty fun for a video, so we'll see. Otherwise, thank you so very much for watching as always. Leave any questions, comments, thoughts down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.